Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. On behalf of all of us here, I invite you to visit our website, tertiumquids.org, and find out what's going on. We'll have white papers starting to come out soon as we get closer and closer to the next General Assembly session. But joining us this first segment this week, two special guests, Chris Wright, Executive Committee member for the Potomac Tea Party, and Jeff Walyus. Pardon me, Jeff, I mispronounced it. Sometimes I see letters that aren't there. Jeff Walyus, who is with Walk Away, the Walk Away Project, and you guys have been doing some joint events up at the Potomac Tea Party and the Walk Away movement in Northern Virginia. First and foremost, thanks for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing?
Real good. Thanks for having us, Joe.
Yeah, just great. Thank you.
Jeff, first take us into the walk away movement. I think as the behavior of our elected representatives gets more and more puzzling to the average person, it becomes understandable why somebody might look at a political party and say, yeah, that's not me. That's not me. That's not what's going on, Jeff. Is that really how this started as a movement amongst members of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, well, it started, just ironically enough, with a gay New York hairdresser, a gentleman named Brandon Straka. He posted a video saying, I've just had enough of the Democrat Party. And since then, his Facebook group, I haven't checked lately, but last time I looked a few weeks ago, it had over 172,000 members. It's getting posted on YouTube, just people with all kinds of stories of just like, look at all these things that the Democrats are against, that, they're rejecting Christian values, hurting the poor, denouncing armed services, law enforcement in our country, et cetera. Just all things that, thankfully, some people are rejecting and walking away from.
It's so intuitive to say nobody wants an innocent person arrested, yet it seems like that has morphed in the world of the Vox Populi into all police officers are corrupt and bad, and nobody should be arrested for anything ever. And I don't think that's where most people are, Jeff. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, it is, and ironically, those horrible police and military that the left hates so much are the only people who can be trusted to hold firearms. I never quite understood how they reconcile that.
So, Chris, when this movement started, I remember the early days of the Tea Party and being very proud here in Charlottesville, our first Tea Party rally. There were Democrats, Libertarians, Republicans. It really didn't matter what your political party was. As a matter of fact, our planning committee had a little bit of all that there. I don't know how long you've been with the Potomac Tea Party, but it certainly reminded me of those early days where it was really just about our government has stopped being representative of us at all. Is that why you guys reached out to try to do some joint events together?
Definitely. We saw some very strong parallels. The Tea Party in its early days was demonized. It had the race card played against us. The IRS was weaponized against us. And we were ridiculed at every turn. So when we saw that the flavor coming through these walkaway posts, that people saying, I've had it, I'm fed up, I can't even speak my mind, I can't even ask a question, my friends jump right down my throat. I'm being ridiculed, I'm being demonized just for asking questions. We could identify with that, and so we crafted an open letter to America's Walkaway Movement, which is now on our website at PotomacTeaParty.com. If I could add a couple of other small points.
Sure.
Jeff mentioned that the Facebook group, Walkaway Group, he mentioned that it was 172,000. I checked today, it's up to 184,000. I can't recall any mass exodus like this from the Democratic Party or the left in my lifetime. The only comparable event I can think of is when the entire South went Republican after being solidly Democratic for, a century or so. So the other thing that came up already in the show is you were alluding to the Democrats not really following the rule of law when it comes to the Kavanaugh hearings. And I got to tell you, I just put up two stories on our page today it's PotomacTeaParty.com, and there's a big link on the homepage to our walkaway page.
Mm-hmm.
And I put up 2 stories today about how there were 2 new walkaways among the several thousand in the last few weeks or so. 2 that have walked away specifically because of the way the Democrats are handling the Kavanaugh hearings. So that's pretty amazing.
Well, and that's one of the ones where I've seen this in my own personal interactions. One of my neighbors is the vice chair of the local Democratic Party, and I happen to mention how we kibitz with one another and we help each other with stuff around our neighborhoods. And she's a great, research doctor at UVA Hospital. And she, a week later, says, you got me in trouble at my next meeting because there were people who were mad that I was saying nice things about her on the air, and that she couldn't be, a leader if a conservative talk show host would say nice things about her. And she said, this is getting unhinged. I got a sense of this during the Democratic National Convention in 2016 with the Bernie Sanders movement and the pressure that was being put on the party from the extreme far socialist movement left, but also the feeling that there were a lot of people who weren't necessarily ideologically left-leaning, but just wanted to be talked to and not lectured, and that was where a lot of Bernie Sanders' power was coming from. Jeff, which is it? Is it the extreme ideological left, or is it just people who felt like Bernie Sanders was at least talking to them and not lecturing them?
It's really people from just a lot of different perspectives. It's not just the really ideological left. I mean, rigging the primary against Bernie didn't really do the Democrats any favors in drumming up enthusiasm. But it's not just the far left that's doing it. People from just centrist, the far reaches all around.
Mm-hmm. When you see business owners, and certainly you see them suffering under greater pressure to, and an often vilification in the press for being bad business owners, even though they might be longtime members of the Democratic Party, I guess that's got to play a role in it too, doesn't it?
Oh, sure. I mean, you say one wrong word and your family is getting doxxed and you're getting death threats against them. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
As you mentioned, it kind of began with a gay hairdresser in New York saying he had enough of it. So does this, and I'll throw it to Jeff first and then Chris, does this indicate to you, because I've been feeling this for some time, that these political seats, these governmental seats, these positions of office, these supposed representative seats, have become too fiscally valuable? There's too much money trafficking through these seats, and it's become this kind of blood sport so that one party or the other needs to have a majority, because the only people I see that pursue this kind of position this much is when there's a financial gain to be had there, Jeff.
Yeah, I think the Twitter personality, David Bird, she goes by at Iowa Hawk Blog. One of the best comments, he said, if you want to get money out of politics, get politics out of money.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the point we've gotten to.
Chris, do you share that thought?
I do. I've thought for a long time that the left always complains about, Citizens United and there being too much money in politics. And I'm fond of saying if you get the government out of what it's not supposed to be doing, then you'll get the money out of politics. Definitely.
We find that, you hear phrases like, oh, it's a public-private partnership, and these sorts of corporatist mantra that just scream corruption, no matter who's in charge of it, whether it's the Pentagon, whether it's the EPA, whoever it is, because these are venture capitalists now that have money coming in. If we don't give them our money to invest in whatever it is they want, we go to jail over it. It's not like your traditional venture capitalists where you can choose to or not invest in the companies that they're putting into. And I think, does that collapse have to come, Chris, before we can get this back together? Because I still fear the collapse economically, because usually history has proven to us there's nothing good that comes out of that.
Well, we're getting a little far afield, but I've thought for a long time. And I interviewed an expert. His name is Lester Thoreau. He's from MIT, big economist, writes books, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked him, I interviewed him one time. I said, when is the collapse coming? We're going to have a sovereign debt crisis, $21 trillion in national debt. When is the world going to get fed up with buying our bonds? And he said, well, we make new stuff all the time, so I can't tell you the timing of the collapse. But I can tell you, me speaking now, that that's still a very distinct possibility if we don't do something about the national debt. And that is one of the Tea Party's core values, limited government under the Constitution, free markets, and fiscal responsibility.
Jeff, I know that during the beginnings of the Tea Party, there was a very good campaign to make us look like, costume-wearing crazy people. But really, the essence is what Chris was saying, was the Tea Party was about taxed enough already, that you have $16 trillion. Don't tell us you need 17 until you've shown us that you've been able to manage within 16. I mean, it wasn't anything more astounding than that. Is that something that I think has been lost in the intervening 7 or 8 years of the movement away from that, and that it has become not as simple as that? Because I thought that was the message that really resonated with most people around the country, was that it was just, listen, you've got $2 billion in Richmond, or $100 million in Charlottesville, or wherever your government is. Live with that. Let's stop asking for more every time we turn around.
Oh, absolutely. I did. One day I just, this was about 6 or 7 years ago, did a blog post. I sat down and just crunched some numbers, figured out, okay, if we wanted to pay off all of our debt, what would it take? I did basically a progressive tax schedule where everybody took a pretty heavy hit. In fact, if you made over $1 million a year, you paid your bill was like $28 million, something ridiculous. But I figured out if every man, woman, child, everybody did. Basically, for me and my wife, our share of that would be about 2/3 of our annual income. If you multiply that across the entire country, what kind of debilitating effect that would have when that reckoning day comes. Mm-hmm. We had a referendum on it in 2012, and, when Paul Ryan, back when a lot of us liked him, gave us this radical, crazed notion of a balanced budget in 30 years, and it got response of ads showing him pushing Randy off the cliff. And so that was really where it died, I think, or it was the beginning of the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, when we can't even manage to, what is the Rand Paul plan, a penny for each penny for each dollar spent, we'd be paid off pretty quickly, but we couldn't even manage to get the connection to do that. Chris Wright is on with us, the executive committee member from the Potomac Tea Party, PotomacTeaParty.com, and Jeff Walyus of Walk Away Project. Jeff, are you in the Northern Virginia area as well?
Correct. I'm in Arlington.
So what is the reaction when you do? Because in the Tea Party, we were hit in 2009 with a lot of, you're a turncoat, you're going to help the Democrats win if you attack Republicans. Are you getting the same pushback as in the Walk Away movement that, you're just going to help Donald Trump, keep control of the House and Senate, and you're, because that was really divisive, I felt, and it drove people out of just a logical conversation about things?
Well, it's not so much that. So there are some similarities. Like, first, they just tried completely ignoring it. Then we started seeing them. They realized, wait a minute, that's not working. Let's ridicule it. You've had Stephen Colbert and others saying that Walk Away is just run by Russian bots. That's it. Well, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of their standard response. If they can't find any facts, just say, it's the Russians. And, another side note, too, President Trump has earned his place on Mount Rushmore. It only took 100 years to get Democrats to acknowledge that the Russians aren't our friends. I mean, if that hasn't earned him a spot, I don't know what will. But, sorry for that aside. And now the latest, Brandon Straka, the man who founded this, they've got a big Walk Away march coming up in D.C. in a few weekends. He got put in Facebook jail for just commenting on a thing about Alex Jones getting banned on being unpersonal on social media. Not even supporting. All he did was report on it, and it got him in Facebook jail right at a time when he's really needed to organize something. So, yeah, a lot of similarities.
And that reminds us of those days when the IRS was slow walking, I guess is the buzzword now, all those Tea Party 501c3 applications, Chris, and it always seemed to be conveniently in a district where there was a tight race for Congress and that a few events might throw the votes one way or another, and not even hypothetical. We have proof that this happened.
We do, and there was a class action suit, two out of three class action suits settled earlier this year for, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, $3 million. One point of difference between Walkaway and the Tea Party, when the Tea Party started, pretty quickly there were local Tea Parties all across the country, and then they networked and organized on a state level, and then 4 or 5 national groups popped up, of which there's really only one left standing, Tea Party Patriots. But the Walkaway people, it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do. I've met with some of them now. They have a meetup group here in D.C. I've met with them. And I'll be meeting some more when I go to one of the events when they have their march in Washington. But it's not clear to me they're going to organize. I've heard Brandon Strzok say he intends to have campus speakers and do some videos. But whether this actually becomes a political movement like the Tea Party, I don't know. And I also wonder whether or not all these folks are going to end up in the same place politically, because it's a very diverse group, and their motivations are all completely different. I don't know that we will see walkaways voting as a bloc or organizing like the Tea Party did. But what I do know is that this is a golden opportunity for people on the right to reach out to whole sets of people that we haven't been accustomed to dealing with. There's a lot of minorities in these videos. There's a lot of gay people who are fed up with being thrown under the bus now that the transgender thing is being cranked up by the left. There are drag queens. There's all kinds of people that people on the right aren't necessarily accustomed to dealing with. But I think if we reach out to them, I'm trying to draw them into the Tea Party and encourage them to look at America's founding principles before they do much else. So I think out of 184,000 people, if we pick up some solid allies for Tea Party core values, then our effort here at Potomac Tea Party will have been well spent.
Well, I know that on August 12th here in Charlottesville of 2017, I was saved a savage beating that I was probably well-deserved because, for all irony's sake, I was being called a racist because of the color of my skin. But we'll leave the irony aside. But the person who came to my defense was the president of Black Lives Matter out of New York, Hawk Newsom, who has spoken at several Trump rallies as well. And every time I think about Walkaway, I think about the conversations I've had with Hawk regarding economic opportunities in the Bronx where he grew up. I grew up in Queens some 30 years before he was born, and how the unending progressive politicians have never really addressed the poverty that's now multi-generational and things like that. Jeff, do you find that in the walkaway movement as well? I don't know if Hawk has reached out or any other folks from the Black Lives Matter movement have talked about it, but some of these folks are in areas where progressive politics has just left them destitute for generation after generation.
Yeah, and you're seeing people start to wake up to that. I mean, in fact, President Trump, I saw one recent poll, his approval hit 36%. The black vote has just been taken for granted by Democrats for so long that now people are starting to wake up to it, which I also think is part of the Democrats' motivation to import as many new voters who they can bring to their side as quickly as possible. Because, this could, if the Democrats lose the black vote, this could easily change the makeup of Virginia, New Jersey, just to name two off the top of my head.
Guys, and first Chris, then Jeff. I want your thoughts on the political implications of this. As much as I really wish we could scrub the necessity for elected representatives, they're going to either reach out back to the Tea Party and to the walkaway movement or not. Folks like libertarian candidates for office, Democrats that have felt like they've been left out to the side. Have you heard from either of them? First Chris, then Jeff.
Well, there's a couple of news stories. One is Elvis's cousin, of all people, Elvis Presley. Mm-hmm. He wrote that he's a politician. If memory serves, it's in Tennessee, and he was sounding some of these themes about how the Democrats, the national Democratic left, is not like what he's accustomed to working with in Tennessee, solving local issues with local Democrats. So he's made some of these noises. More recently, there was a Vermont politician. Now, this guy was a former state legislator and a former mayor of a town, and he just wrote that he has switched to the Republican Party because high-tax progressive policies, job-killing policies of the Democratic Party in Vermont are driving ordinary Vermonters out of the state. So there is some of that going on.
And Jeff, what about you? Have you heard from friends who are maybe elected office holders or party officials saying, yeah, we agree with you and maybe there's reform coming?
Yeah, my answer is a lot less interesting than Chris's. No, I haven't heard from anyone.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that because but my experience here in Charlottesville has very much been, there are Democratic, if not office holders. And that's what I worry, both Republican and Democrat. I worry that there's too much of a sellout if you're going to become a Republican member of the Virginia House of Delegates or if you're going to be a Democratic Party member, that you've got to kind of sell your individuality out to the political party's dogma, and you lose that ability to say, hold it, I really like it. Guys like Chap Peterson, I've agreed with him on some fiscal issues, if not all of them. But it seems like those guys are becoming the novelty, not the reality. Chris, we'll start with Chris. I'm sorry, I should have said Chris, then Jeff on that.
Well, politics is not our strong suit, at least not mine. I'm more on propagating the core values, which is why I got interested in the walkaway movement, because of part of it was they were having ideological dissatisfactions. But the thing about legislators here in Virginia, you had the Democrats fight for Medicaid expansion for 5 years. We fought them off for 4 years, lost in the fifth year. But it was the Republicans who put it over the top. So I need to back up and tell people that we do a lot of booths, and people come up to our booths, and they're often confused. Are you a political party? No, we're not a political party. Tea Party doesn't field candidates.
Nope.
And also, we do not endorse candidates. So I'm sorry, that's about the only answer I have for you.
No, that's fine. That's one of the things I liked about the Tea Party from the get-go is that they would sponsor. Tom Perriello spoke at several of the Central Virginia, Jefferson area Tea Party events when he was in Congress and fielded, questions about those very things. I think it's something George Washington warned us about in his farewell address, that even within 8 years we were developing into a partisan divide. What about you, Jeff? Do you find that it's frustrating when you think there are people who can't possibly agree with all these dogmatic steps a political party has, but in order to be a member of the House of Delegates or the U.S. House of Representatives or anything like that, you have to kind of sell out and toe the party line?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was a great series of videos on Facebook called The Swamp. It was a 4-part series. Mm-hmm. It talked to a few Republicans, and it was probably one of the most depressing things I've ever seen. It just talks about how you get in, you're told how you're supposed to vote. If you want your bills to come up, or if you want to get on more powerful committees, you have to raise a certain amount of money for the RNC, which of course means working with all of their preferred lobbyists. And yeah, I absolutely do see it.
Well, we know several of the members who were in that video. As a matter of fact, one of them is a Virginia congressman, and interestingly enough, all of them have had internal strife befall their office where staffers have started to whisper things to Politico and other magazines to cause trouble for them, either back in their districts or on the larger scale as well. It's interesting how that coincidentally happened to them. And I've spoken to the producers of the documentary. They reached out to many members of the Democratic Party, and they were told we'd love to, but we can't. And I guess that's the subtext of the Swamp documentary, is that we'd love to, but we can't, is a little frightening in a country where we're supposed to have free speech. I guess you sell that out for political campaign contributions. Jeff, how do people find out more? Is it just through the hashtag #WalkAway, or is there a good web page, a resource for the listeners to go and to encourage people to go find out more about the walkaway movement in their homes in Lynchburg and Roanoke and Charlottesville and across Virginia?
Well, I'm not sure about how on a local level to find them, but the hashtag walkaway, if you look for it on YouTube, there's a dedicated channel to it. They put up new videos every day, people telling their stories of why they did. They've got their Facebook group is there as well. I'm sure once you start drilling in, you start finding some people with live a little closer to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what
if I could add that there's also the Facebook group it's on Facebook, and it's just the hashtag walkaway campaign. You put that in the search box, it'll pop right up. Also, our page at PotomacTeaParty.com. Again, there's a link from the homepage to our walkaway page. We keep the walkaway page up to date. We put the current news on there. We put the Brandon Strzok's original video is on there. There's a walkaway song at this point. We have a video of that. So if you want to stay up to date on what this movement is doing, we have the best all-in-one resource for you.
Did you, Chris, last one, did you face any sort of resistance within your Tea Party group of people who said, no, we shouldn't reach out to them? Because sometimes I get at some point or another, somebody will just be, set in the idea that, good versus bad binary, which is, I think, part of the problem is we're treating everything like a 1 or a 0. Did you face any resistance, and what advice would you give anyone who runs a Tea Party organization that might be listening that would like to do this locally?
Well, we didn't run into resistance from our own Tea Party members, but when Jeff's editorial was published by the Daily Signal, there were something on the order of 500 comments or so, and they were all over the lot. Some were supportive. Some said you can't trust these walkaway people because they don't know who they are. Others said you can't trust these walkaway people because they're just plants by the Democratic Party, and once we let them in the tent, they're gonna do great mischief. And there were all kinds of comments. So.
That's it's important. Jeff, I feel for you. You're getting it from Stephen Colbert and from Tea Party members. So I guess maybe you are a Russian bot. We don't know. You speak very good English for a Russian bot. That's all I know.
I do. Well, one valid concern I think they raised was saying that if we're letting in too many Democrats, they're going to water down our conservative values and it gets basically more rhinos through our primaries. I mean, I think that's a valid concern, but frankly, I'd rather have them coming over and voting against Democrats than not. I think it's definitely the lesser of two evils.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Thank you both for spending some time with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. I remember catching this story several months ago when it first came about, Chris, and I've been compelled by it ever since. And thank you both for taking some time out.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. If I give you just one closing thought, I think that what really drives the walkaway movement is where the Democrats have become today. When you build your coalitions based on identity politics, eventually your allies run out of other people to hate.
It's very much it's like that poem from World War II. First they came from the trade unionists. ... Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you.
Superheroes, do they need supervillains? Travis Smith, Concordia University, and superheroes versus supervillains next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Our next guest returns to us. The author of Superhero Ethics is Travis Smith, Associate Professor of Political Science at Concordia University and has just written a wonderful piece that I think is so timely right now as we watch everything from school board meetings on up devolve into shouting, screaming, and threat-hurling matches. His latest piece is called Your Neighbors Probably Aren't Super Villains. Travis, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me back on the show today, Joe.
It's our pleasure, and it is a sense for what I feel like is happening to a very small percentage of our population, but they are the population that is getting most of the TV time, is this part of our population that is convinced that they must do battle with their neighbors politically as Batman battles the Joker. And are you sensing the same thing, it seems?
Right. I think in your opening remarks, you're right to point out that this is something that's been building and going on and getting worse for a while, and it happens at all levels of society. And what I'm interested in is not just what happens among, our elected leaders in distant capital cities, but rather what happens at the local level. Mm-hmm. What happens between ordinary citizens within their communities, neighbors, people on social media networks. How do ordinary people treat each other when they start, seeing each other not merely as rivals or opponents or people we disagree with, because we always disagree with each other, but some sort of outright enemy, some sort of supervillain, some sort of unmitigated evil. When you're using that kind of language, you've exceeded sort of political contestation. Now you're entering, you're almost entering into the language of conflict, right? You're entering into the language of conflict, and that it's very worse. It borders on the language of holy war once the language of extreme righteousness versus total evil starts to be brought into it, and I find that concerning, Joe.
I want to jump to a part of your column, but I want to first jump in there because I love your reference to Roger Waters' phrase, the bravery of being out of range. But
you an old Floyd fan too, Joe?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But we see little by little, I guess, we shrug off somebody who goes into somebody's yard to tear up a yard sign for a political candidate they oppose, they might make some rude noises during a comment session at a local city council, but it has gotten worse and worse till it's shouting down. It's 5, 6, 7 people confronting an individual in a parking lot after a school board meeting. It's all manners of things. Do the elected officials who tacitly encourage this sort of behavior bear responsibility for reining this in? Because sure, it makes nice theater, and I get 50% of 20% voter turnout, so I win the congressional seat. But what does it leave in its wake?
Right. Well, I don't think that there's a coincidence that the ramping up of partisan divide happens every time there's an election season that comes around. It seems like it's ramping up real good presently, and of course that means that the people who have something to gain, something to profit by, or to some power to win by, as I put it in terms of comic book characters consistent with my book Superhero Ethics, as if they want to enlist ordinary folk as their henchmen or their lackeys. Or the cannon fodder in some sort of battle.
That's true.
Because there is an awful lot at stake. But you're right. My concern today, right now, is more about what does that do to us? What does that do to how are we going to continue to do business with the people that we have to do business with? How are we going to get along with our neighbors? How are we going to continue to communicate with each other? What's going to happen to our trust? What's going to happen to our ability to not just learn how to get along, but have the kind of civilized argument and discourse that's necessary in order that, people might be persuaded to change their minds. Instead, you get people who are just going to totally dig their heels in, and everybody takes the most extreme version of their own position. And then what's worse, I think, is that everybody attributes the most extreme, the most ungenerous version of their opponent's perspective or motivations or intentions to cast them in the role of the villain, because in order to be as big of a hero as you want to be, you need as big of a villain out there to stand up against. But when you're dealing with, yelling at people on social media, that's not particularly heroic.
No.
I don't see much risk or sacrifice being made by people who heroically engage in some sort of online posse.
Well, and the posse becomes real when we see things like Ted Cruz being shouted out of a restaurant. How does somebody run a public space? Even a radio station can be victimized by it. I have sister stations here at our flagship, and they're threatened by people who say, "Well, you allow this radio station to exist, so therefore we must protest you because you can ill afford it, or we feel like you can be pushed around." We see restaurants, movie theaters targeted, the Gosnell movie and premieres being canceled because of riots and threats against private property. Is this part and parcel also of this cavalier attitude towards private property as somehow being some sort of class warfare, Professor?
Well, I think it goes beyond class warfare now in terms of the number of ways in which populations are divided against each other. So, the old-fashioned Marxists used to just say everything was really just a matter of class, and it was the bourgeois versus the proletariat, and every conflict needs to be reduced to and understood only in those terms. The strategy today is the opposite. The strategy today is to proliferate the number of ways in which you can claim that there is not just disagreement, maybe, and not just. Sometimes there's a real injustice, but it's a question of how do you try to address and seek redress for injustices, right? But it's let's split people and create as many antagonisms as possible, and then take each of those antagonisms and create almost the most cartoonish caricature of it, and treat that as if that's the reality, and paint the characters involved in it as if you were dealing with the difference between saints and demons. I point out that the language of either you're with us or you're against us is the language of war. And the phrase does appear in the Gospels, but it's in the context of the conflict between the Holy Spirit and the demonic. If you want to talk about a war on a cosmic scale, that would be the
original
grandest of all. But portraying our domestic disputes as if we were participating in the war between the Holy Spirit and the demonic, that's extreme to me.
Well, and I used to think that it was just a part and parcel of things are good. So, in the place of real danger, real strife, real challenge, real heroism being needed, we concoct this. But it's more and more, I feel like that oversimplifies it, and it is deeper than that. That we're seeking meaning somewhere and we're attaching it to the wrong places.
Well. Right, the temptation to be convinced that one is heroic and that one and one's own are righteous, and is about as strong a temptation as we find inside the human condition. When I wrote Superhero Ethics, I was looking at these fictional characters, but in order to treat them, because they have such sort of enduring appeal and popularity around the world, they must speak to sort of fundamental qualities or aspects of the human condition. And I look at them not just in order to cheer them on, but to be a little bit critical about them as well. And while we do in fact need courage, and not just heroes who will run into burning buildings, but we need courage in order to just be the best version of ourselves and contribute to our communities. To try to make a case in front of people for what you regard to be best, or most most profitable, or from the profitable to the noble. But so courage is an important virtue for all citizens in a free society to learn to develop if we're going to have the best society we can. But of course, the temptation to heroism exceeds that, and when the spirit of righteousness can go beyond civilized parameters. Yeah. I mean, there are superheroes that I address in the book, like Wolverine and the Hulk, who are known for extreme violence and bloodiness, and the question of whether or not conflict necessarily deteriorates into a dishonorable and a miserable mess is an open question, right? It's maintaining civilized conflict on the terms of reasoned debate and trying to avoid painting our opponents as if they were villains is a cornerstone of modern liberal democratic free society that allowed us to escape the holy wars of bygone centuries.
So is that the answer? Is introspection? Is realizing that something you as you say, the Roger Waters quote, courage, bravery of being out of range. Getting off of the social media and realizing that, just like we tell our kids, if you wouldn't say it to somebody's face, you shouldn't say it online. I want to find fixes for it. Is it just exposing things like what you're saying, Professor Smith?
I've written a book on ethics, and that's an old-fashioned term, and a lot of people might poo-poo it today. But of course, the concerns of ethics never go away when the concerns of ethics are about character. Right? What kind of person are you going to be, whether you want to use old-fashioned language like in your soul or just modern language like yourself? Who are you going to be? And so I want to look at it from that perspective. Is when you consider who you want to be in your interactions with others, especially given that you'll always be interacting with people that you disagree with, always.
Yeah.
What kind of person do you want to be and become, and what kind of example do you want to set, and how much would you rather try to be a model of hopefulness and inspiration rather than contribute to the engines of misery?
It sounds like you're saying something that I've grappled with probably much less eloquently than you just did. It's defining yourself not by what you're against, but by what you're for. Or is that again leave us to a place where rivalry becomes the issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure if what you're for is the exact way I'd want to put it. So I'm sorry, that doesn't quite.
Well, no, I'm
right to me.
The secret, the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, is they don't realize this is like me getting free college credits when I get to talk to folks like you. So please, by all means, tell me I'm wrong, and I'll go back and I'll think about it some more. Because I think it's the only way we can get forward in our lives if we realize that we all live on the same streets, and I don't have a right to break your stuff, and you don't have a right to break my stuff. Certainly not because you favor one congressional candidate over another. Right.
No, you've got me in agreement with you now for sure, Joe.
And perhaps the value of these seats to the political parties needs to be taken away to a degree. Then it doesn't push them so much into the blood sport of the arena. We need as many people out on the street so I can win this congressional seat, because I think sometimes that value has grown to an inappropriate place as well.
Right, and I guess part of my attitude is. The last thing I'm saying is to disengage from politics. Right? I do think that our addictions to cable news and social media feeds are probably not healthy for us if we are sort of neurotically addicted to those kinds of things. And I would recommend of course vote for who you prefer. Right, and make a public case for the positions you regard as preferable. But instead of dedicating yourself to yelling at people in a virtual venue. Find some way to make a positive, constructive contribution to the causes that matter to you most.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And that happens at the local level. And free citizens in a free society, at least, used to be understood that we take care of ourselves by actually taking care of ourselves and not delegating and deferring our responsibility to taking care of us to those who we look at as if they were our heroes or our saviors in office. That's not the responsibility that should be entrusted to anybody.
Oh, absolutely refreshing when you go and you volunteer for a local charity, whatever that charity may be, anything from the SPCA to a soup kitchen and everything in between.
The local scale is the human scale, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a degree to which once everything is pitched on the national level or the global level or the cosmic level, right?
Yeah.
Then you cannot help but feel helpless. You cannot help but feel, I am just one person, I can't accomplish any real good. I'm like the spectator in a superhero movie who can just shriek in fear or cheer in excitement when the battle's taking place and the sky's overhead.
Yeah.
But you know, the incremental and local contributions of citizens are what together build communities.
Absolutely. Travis, thank you so much for spending this weekend with us. Travis Smith, professor of political science at Concordia University, author of Superhero Ethics. Great piece. We're going to share it on social media. Your neighbors probably aren't supervillains. Thank you for reminding us of that, Travis, and you have a wonderful weekend, sir.
Thank you very much. Good talking to you today. Thanks for having me on Freedom Prosperity Radio.
And we will have you back often. Thank you for listening as well. Get out of the phone booth if you can find one, please, and go find somebody to help right there on your street. Until next week, for all of us here at Freedom and Prosperity Radio, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.